Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Planning Committee. They moved the clock over there. It really freaks me out when I try and turn around. Before I start, I just need to read this notice out. May I remind everyone present, this meeting will be broadcast live via the internet and a recording archived for future viewing. Have we got any apologies for absence? I think I see every chair filled. So
Yes, Chair, there's an apology from Councillor Burnett, please.
In the corner. Sorry. Okay, noted. Minutes of the last meeting. Okay to move those? Thank you. All in favour? Thank you. Can I receive any declarations of interest, please? Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chairman. In item 10, 2016-00168 Knoll Cottage, 54 Cog Road, Sully. I'll be leaving the room as I'm the agent for the applicant.
Thank you very much. Oh, I didn't turn on there. Any other declarations of interest? Okay, moving on to item 4. Just to note site inspections from last time. Noted, thank you. Item 5, delegated building regs applications. Just to make you aware, upon noticing a couple were missing their decision codes, these are now tabled in front of you just for information. Didn't go out with the papers. With those amendments, are we happy to note those? Thank you very much. Item 6 on our agenda is delegated planning applications. Happy to move those. Thank you. Item 7, appeals. Marcus, you want to say a brief word about appeals?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, there's not a huge amount on this list. There is one application which was the subject of actually 2 appeals for the same issue, an enforcement appeal and a planning appeal. It relates to the use of the site for basically log preparation for as a business use for sale onwards. The appeal was dismissed, or the appeals were dismissed, and you'll note that at the moment the appeal dismissal rate is 75% to 25%, so that's quite a good, healthy success rate of appeals.
Thank you. There are no questions from the committee. I'll move that. Happy to note. Thank you. Item 8 is our delegated trees list. Happy to move that. Thank you very much. Item 9, general planning matters. Point 1, land at Berth 31, Wimborne Road, Barry. Marcus?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we're going to ask if this can be deferred by committee. Information was provided to councillors, not to the planning department actually, but to councillors last night, I understand. That information ran to about 8 or 9 pages. This is not a planning application, as the report makes clear. It's what's known as a certificate of lawful development, and we require the legal officer to give advice on these particular applications as it relates solely to land use and evidence that proves the land use has gone on for a period of time. There are suggestions in the information that was submitted that might be relevant, but we'd need the lawyer to look at them. And unfortunately, the lawyer who has looked at this is James Doherty, who's normally here. James has had to go into hospital to have an urgent operation, so isn't available. So I am asking if this could be deferred so that James, on his return, can have a look at it and just comment on those.
Thank you, Marcus. I'm happy to move deferment. Jonathan, seconded. Okay. All those in favour? Thank you very much. I apologise to our public speakers. Clearly, you just need to re-register next time to make sure you speak on the subject. Okay. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 10, planning applications. The first planning application is 2016/00168/FUL Knoll Cottage, 54 Cog Road, Sully. Andrew's left the room. Ian, you happy to introduce this one, please?
Just to note first, there's some late representations for this application. Matters arising for this application. The first one is just an amendment to one of the conditions and the plan numbers. The second one is comments from the Community Council objecting strongly, and the third one is a series of further objections received from neighbours in respect of the amended plans. Okay, so this is an application to demolish the existing house and replace it with 3 dwellings, one broadly on the footprint or towards the same footprint at the front of the site, and 2 further dwellings to the rear. The existing access point to the site on the right-hand side would be stopped up, and a new vehicular access would be provided at the left-hand side of the frontage, which would serve all 3 houses. The proposals also involve carriageway widening along part of Cog Road and the provision of a 2-metre grass verge along the frontage, just to emphasise that it wouldn't be a pedestrian footway, it would be a grass verge which would potentially accommodate a footway in the future should scope to provide a continuous footway further along Cog Road be realised. Within the site, there's 2 detached dwellings to the rear. The designers, this is the house at the front, and the 2 houses at the rear slightly smaller. Members to note that the balconies shown on these 2 dwellings we're seeking to remove them by condition. There'll be an affordable housing contribution associated with this development unless a self-build exemption applies, and that's detailed later on in the report. The main issues for us are the visual impact, layout and design, impact on neighbours, especially those on Glastonbury Road whose back gardens adjoin the development site, highway and pedestrian safety along Cog Road, which is the subject of a number of the representations we received. And also I should note that there's there's protected trees at the front of the site. Now the works to provide the access and the grass verge would necessitate the removal of some of the trees. It should be noted that the tree report accompanying the application concludes that the majority of the trees in that group are either dead or dying and need to be removed on safety grounds. The officer's recommendation is that the group should be replaced with a properly planned scheme of replanting. Essentially, at the moment, it's our view that there's too many large trees too close to each other, and on the whole, they're suffering as a result. They're either poorly formed, dying, leaning, covered in ivy, and it's also our view that the provision of the scope for the footway and the carriageway widening would represent a highway safety benefit which would outweigh any harm from the loss of those trees. I think that's all.
Thank you, Ian. I'd like to invite Councillor Marnie to come forward. As an elected member of the Vale Council, you'll have 3 minutes when you're ready, Kevin.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity to put across a few points. I've been approached by a number of residents in the area to express some of the concerns in the area. The obvious ones are, as anybody will know, certainly the councillors who visited the site this morning, Cog Road is of course virtually a country lane with no pedestrian provision whatsoever. Here we have an existing building being knocked down and replaced by 3, and I see provision for 9 parking spaces. The inference, of course, of at least 9 cars to be there. The new parking, the new driveway in provision is felt it will be very close to an existing junction at Glastonbury Road. And some of the concerns of fellow residents, I think has been touched on there, backing onto this site, is that basically their properties could be overlooked. They'll be overlooking new properties. And also with the provision for parking of 9 spaces right in the middle of the site, in essence, they'll be looking out over a car park, which isn't the most pleasant of situation. There is, of course, again, not a precedent, but certainly a continuation of backyard development. I appreciate this could be regarded as a very large backyard, but where is this going to end? We know that there's already planning permission for 350 houses just up the road at Cog Road, and I think those councillors present there today would have been, I say shocked isn't quite the right word, but certainly conscious of the large flow of traffic from what existing houses there are already, with 350 to come online, plus this situation here with more cars coming out on, which is almost a blind bend. There were those fears as well. So all in all, these are some of the comments that have been passed on to me. I share some of those concerns. I appreciate the need for new housing and all the rest of it, but when is it really all going to end, this sort of thing? Thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Kevin. I think we've got a question of clarification from Councillor Johnson.
Yes, Chair. It's my usual question of clarification to councillors coming to speak here today. What are you asking us to do with this application in front of us tonight? To accept, reject, or find some other way of dealing with it?
That's not clarification. If you would like to invite me onto the planning committee, I'd quite welcome take your place, Ian. Thank you very much.
Okay, that's an answer. Ian.
Yeah, just to come back on some of those points. Yeah, at the moment, it's not a particularly attractive environment for pedestrians to walk along. And as Councillor Marnie notes, the development further up the road is likely to result in more traffic along the road and potential for more pedestrians. Whilst this development wouldn't secure a pedestrian route, it's our highways officer's view that along with the frontage of the adjoining site, which potentially might become available in the future if the neighbour sought to develop in the same way, in an acceptable way, there's scope for a continuous route between Glastonbury Road and the adopted verges just north of, north on this plan, above the frontage of 52. So there is scope for significant improvements to pedestrian activity, which I would say should be particularly welcomed in the context of the additional development that's been approved up the road. In terms of parking, yeah, there's 3 spaces proposed per unit. They won't necessarily all be used, but obviously they could be. It's quite a large site, and there is scope for a lot of landscaping through that. So I'm not of the view that views towards cars in that context would be unduly harmful. The access point, the highways officers have looked at it. They're not concerned that it's too close to Glastonbury Road, and actually, I should have mentioned earlier, there was planning permission granted a few years ago for a vehicular access in the location proposed now, albeit without associated improvements to vision visibility along the road. Overlooking the distances between windows, habitable room windows and neighbours' windows and neighbours' gardens satisfy our amenity standards. In terms of precedent, there's not many gardens along Cog Road which could accommodate this kind of thing. There are some other large gardens, but this is one of the very largest. There are actually some similar pockets of development in each direction along Cog Road, one closer to the pub and another one between this site and the larger development site up the road. Traffic, yes, as I noted earlier, there's likely to be an increase in traffic along the road, and I think that's part of the reason why we see the potential for pedestrian improvements to be a significant benefit here. I think that covers all the points.
Thank you, Ian. I'll open to the floor, and I'll start with Councillor Penrose, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to go all through over all the points again. I think Councillor Marnie summed up most of them, and everybody have read the reports. Some of the ones I'd like to highlight, one of the things, first of all, is that I would be a bit condemning about today's site visit because we couldn't get access to the site to really see anything, and the purpose of a site visit is to be able to see and quantify whether there's overdevelopment, whether there's overlooked by other properties, and we just couldn't get access to it, which I don't want to burden us with sort of a deferral and have a site visit, but it would have been more quantitative for us to make a decision had we had access to the site. We've had the residents and complaints. There's some of them which I'd like clarification on, and the first one is Ian stated that there's a widening in the highway. I don't believe there's a widening in the actual highway. I think it's just making provision with the bank for a future footpath. There's concern amongst residents that because of the speeds of Cog Road, of vehicles travelling along there, that these form natural hazards that do tend to slow up, so they're a bit like road narrowing and work, and if it is widened then further down the traffic's going to be even faster. That's one of the concerns. A concern which I share with residents is the removal of trees with TPOs. I accept some of the trees are diseased, but there are several trees there which are magnificent trees and will have to come out. I think that's a great shame, and especially when I go to other site visits where we have TPOs and we have to leave old fir trees up in St Hilary that look shocking, and on this one we're knocking down healthy specimens of trees. The highways access, and I'm not a highways engineer, but we do know the access there. We do know the existing junctions close to it, and it will be an additional hazard. We had experience of that because somebody pulled into the property and had to come back out, and we were sort of, if you like, trying to guide him outwards, although we got a mouthful of abuse because he'd been doing it for 20 years, but that was something else. But it is a difficult part of the road, and I think there will be potential hazards when the traffic increases to cater for up to 540 houses if the extension to Cogkaiser Home. There's only one thing which I would like to be put into the condition should this committee deem to go forward with it, and that is screening to the properties between this and the properties. I think some of the screening is there. It would be a nice provision for the developer to put screening between there. At least then the overlooking factor perhaps wouldn't be quite as severe as it is proposed at the moment. But other than that, no, I've got nothing else to add on it. Obviously, there's a strength of feeling with residents, but quite often on housing schemes there are. And I wait to hear from other members' opinions on it.
Thank you, Councillor Penrose. I'll hear from Ian again before we go back to whether we change a condition with regards to screening. Ian?
Okay. The carriageway is widened. In terms of safety, there's different rationales with highway safety depending on the context. You know, sometimes increasing forward visibility can have an impact on the speeds. Other times it's about making sure junctions and accesses are safe. The reason I suspect that there was difficulty with this chap coming out of the drive as before I arrived was that the visibility is very poor there at the moment. And obviously what we're introducing is a situation where there would be better visibility. The highways officers have looked at it and have spent a lot of time going back and forth with the agent, and I defer to their view on it. They're happy that this is a safer arrangement than the existing. TPOs at the front, I guess it's subjective as to what's magnificent and what's not. I think when you drive up there, the group of trees together have the effect of a mature green sort of setting to that house. If you look at each one individually, my own view is I don't think they're magnificent. Most of them are poorly formed with growth on one side. They're leaning. They're in very poor health, and that's the vast majority of them. You know, as I say, it's a judgment anyone's entitled to make as to the value they place on the tree. But that's the appraisal that we've made on them. In terms of the proximity between Glastonbury Road and the junction, and whether it's a hazard, again, I'll say that, you know, the engineers have looked at it. They're happy with it. We're not going to be looking at a significant number of vehicle movements using this access. 3 is more than would be at the moment, but it's a safer access, and it's 3 houses. So that's not going to attract a lot of movements per day. In terms of screening and overlooking, there is a condition for landscaping on that strip. Obviously, the details of that will be what the applicant proposes, and then it's up to us to assess whether they're acceptable. I would just emphasise that there's no habitable room windows at first floor on the side elevation. The distances are as per what our guidance recommends. Not to say that there shouldn't be landscaping there to try and soften the impact of the development, but I personally I can't think of a specific measure I would recommend in a condition to say this would be necessary to block views. I think it's a case of assessing the landscaping that comes up from the applicant, but I'm happy that there's certainly adequate scope for significant landscaping there to soften the impact of it.
I've got Councillor Thomas next, then I'll come back to Councillor Penrose. Councillor Thomas?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Certainly looking at the plot, I mean, it was a shame that we couldn't get on to assess it better. But looking at the size of the plot, doesn't appear to be overdevelopment. However, I agree with Councillor Penrose's concerns about one particular tree at the front there, which I'm not great on tree species, but that some of the trees that are there with TPOs on, one was certainly dead. Another one next to it looked particularly sick, but there was one that had cones on. I'm guessing some sort of evergreen, but I don't know what it was. That most of those on the site visit commented on what a nice looking, what magnificent tree it was. I'm afraid, Ian, you're in the minority on that. Minority one from the comments I heard this morning, and maybe that needs to be re-looked at. On the scale of things and looking at the size of this, and generally looking at it, I can't really see a good planning reason to deny this. Apart from, like I say, I'd like to see that tree kept.
Okay, I think I can move on. I mean, it's a subjective conversation about the tree.
Just to note that the tree is got growth on one side, it's leaning, and the arboriculturalist is of the view that if you remove the others, there's potential safety issues with that being exposed within a group of what would then be smaller trees. So that's one of the reasons why we feel it probably isn't worthy of attention.
Okay. Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chair. Like my fellow councillor, I have concern about this application. I'm not happy with where the new entrance is. It is a very dangerous bend. The trees are concerning in parts, but then we're losing a lot of trees as well. I think it's going to spoil it personally. But when we walked round to the back, and it was a fair walk round, but we walked round and I went up to the top. The more I looked at those trees, there was very healthy trees there. There wasn't really dead trees. I know there was one leaning, I could see that. And I'm not very tall, but I could see there was one tree leaning, but the other trees were quite healthy. But what worries me is that new access. It's right on a bend, it's coming out onto near another road, and I'm like this. I have got problems with it. I cannot say, hand on heart, that I'm happy with it and it will be safe. And you're saying it's widening. I'd like to know how much widening. There's the green part, yes, and people will be walking down there. They will not say, oh, we're not going to walk down there. They will walk down there, and I want to know how much widening you're on about. And then another one before we go any further. You're saying that the balconies is going to be removed. Is he removing them, or is that going to be our request?
Ian?
Yeah, fine. Not to labour the point on the trees, but much of the health issues with the trees is around the buttresses and the trunk lower down, so you wouldn't be able to establish if they're healthy without seeing the trees, you know, all the way up. I think it's probably the last I can say on the trees. I haven't got the exact dimension in terms of how much wider it is. I think it's in the region of 1 metre, but I'd need to put a scale ruler to the plan to do that. But I'm happy to, I can follow up this with that information for you if you wish. Bear in mind that at the moment, if you're standing at that access point looking down the road, you might think it's unsafe because you haven't got great visibility down the road. But the point of the new access and the verge and the widening is that visibility would be significantly improved compared to what it is today. So you have to be some way into the site behind trees to actually be at the position where you would then have visibility back along the carriageway. The verge, would people walk along it? I personally wouldn't. If I saw a strip of grass that led to nowhere, I wouldn't choose to walk down it. I mean, that opinion is shared by the highways officers. We don't think this is unsafe. If we were requiring a footway there now, I think I'd agree with you, because that would encourage people to walk along it. But I'm not convinced that a grass strip would. And finally, the balconies were requiring by condition that the balconies can't be built. So.
In terms of visibility display, I'm right from remembering in the report, 2.4 metres by 43 metres. Is 43 metres the vision down the road from the new, from the centre point of the new display, the new access point?
Would be, I think it's fair to say, it'd be greater to the, as you're coming out to the right hand side, to the left is where there's poorer visibility currently. It would be 43 in both directions. I'm saying that I think, well, it would be at least 43. If you look at the plan on the screen, it would actually be significantly better to the. It's not the south, but it's towards the bottom of the plan.
Okay, I mean that's the assessment by the highways engineer on the report. Councillor Wilkinson, did you want to say anything? Councillor Bird.
Just a quick question, curiosity really. What is the speed limit? It's 30, I believe, isn't it?
I can't remember top of my head.
So if we can, via the microphone, just confirm that we're saying that the speed limit's 30, and there's been issues with speeding logged with the community speeds surveys.
Yeah, I was going to add,
Penrose?
because of course it is unfortunate that it is a real rat run there where people go from the Mary Harriers through Sully Road, so you get a huge amount of traffic and of course quite a lot which are a bit sort of not keeping to the speed limits, but there isn't too much you can do about it because, as you said, part of a country lane. You know, so.
Councillor Penrose, in terms of in terms of the condition, are you still moving a change on the condition with regard to screening in light of
I mean,
comments
I'd
from the
like
planning
to
officer?
move a condition then, and I can't imagine that the agent would have, or the owner would have difficulty with it, but I think it goes some way to appease the situation of softening it from both sides, you know, so that how's that looking for a simple landscaping scheme, you know. Yeah,
So,
I don't know if anybody else feels the same, so I need a second to help.
Councillor Bird?
As I understand it, I think the landscaping thing would cover that screening. So there is a landscaping clause in the condition, so I think that would cover it, Bob.
There's also a means of enclosure condition too, which is just which one is? I'll put a little look. Condition 4. Condition 4. So that does deal.
I mean, 5 on landscaping, it's non-specific. It doesn't say that certain things have to be provided, but there's probably a number of different acceptable landscaping options, so it would be wrong of us probably to limit them to one, but the landscaping condition would certainly include and relate to that part of the site. Obviously, we, if approved, we would have particular regard to the need for that to be robust and appropriate.
Councillor Bird?
If there's no more debate, I'd move officer's recommendation, Chair.
I have a seconder here. All those in favour of officer recommendations with the conditions as stated in the reports? All those against? 2. Any abstentions? Thank you very much. That passes. Moving on to planning application 2018/00782. Oh, Andrew. We'll get Andrew in. Okay, Kevin's going to get Andrew in. Neil, Councillor Thomas, can I just confirm, did you vote in favour? I saw your hand go up. Yeah, fine. Just for our, Amy was asking me to check. On to our final planning application 2018/00782/FUL at Pancross Farm in Llancarvan. I believe Marcus is introducing this one.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is an application for an agricultural building measuring 36.5 metres long by just over 15.5 metres wide. It is largely open-sided. It is 577 metres square, and it is within the confines or adjacent to an existing number of farm buildings at a farm known as Pancross Farm. It is enclosed on 3 sides by Yorkshire boarding to provide ventilation and will be open at one end. Essentially, this is required for animal husbandry purposes, not to increase the size of or number of animals within the herd at the farm. It's intended to use it for sick and animals which are either pregnant or have young calves. It is quite a big building, although only just slightly larger than what is normally allowed under agricultural permitted development rights. Believe it or not, you can build a building up to 465 metres square under agricultural permitted development rights. It is a very large farm in unit. This farm probably is the biggest farm in the Vale of Glamorgan. From the point of view, it has been called to committee by the local member, and the reason it's been called to committee is some of the concerns have been raised by the local community council regarding possible surface water runoff and other issues such as noise and possible smells within the community. And essentially, we've addressed those issues within the body of the report, both drainage and other issues. In particular, it must be noted this isn't intended to increase the size of the herd. It is just intended for existing animal husbandry purposes. And finally, from the point of view of visibility and appearance, obviously I wasn't on the site visit today, but I do know that the holding, and it is pretty much impossible to see from large portions surrounding the site, including Llancarvan. You might be able to see it from the raised land the other side of Llancarvan, but that would be set against the backdrop of all the existing buildings. So your officers are recommending it for approval subject to conditions.
Thank you, Marcus. I'll invite Councillor Gordon-Kemp to come forward. As elected member of the Glamorgan Council, you will have 3 minutes when you're ready. Yeah, hold on 2 seconds, Gordon. Do we want to speak to the matters arising, Marcus?
Oh, sorry, yeah, just... Sorry, there are some late representations. A letter... Sorry, just have a quick look. A letter received from a neighbouring resident raising concerns about noise and smells.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kemp, you'll have 3 minutes when you're ready.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for giving me the opportunity of coming here this afternoon, and thank you for the site visit this morning, although, can I say, it was a little disappointing that there were so few members attending that, because, as Councillor Penrose explained earlier, the purposes for site visits, I think, would have been really demonstrated in this particular case, to have a site of this, particularly where it stands above the village. Mark has said it's perhaps difficult to see this from most of Llancarvan, but the unfortunate problem is most people smell it from all parts of, from large parts of Llancarvan, and that is one of the prime concerns that people have, together with considerable runoff of water and other materials from the site, which, as those members who are on the site visit, but those who can read the plan will see, this stands, as I say, above the village. The road down into the village runs immediately below it, and there is considerable runoff down that road on many occasions, which does cause severe problems. As Mark has said about the number of animals, I noted the actual description in the report, which says it is understood that the herd will not be increased, but obviously that is not something that is certain. There's always the possibility of additional habitation for animals, that there would be further increase in the size of the herd, which is only going to cause the problems that we have. As I say, there has been flooding caused by this. There is a smell which makes, for a lot of people, very difficult to actually use their gardens during summer. And there has been some element of landslip along there. I would welcome the fact that there is a recommendation in the report for drainage issues to be taken into consideration, and if members are minded to approve this, subject to, again, particularly to that recommendation, I wonder whether it's possible, but before, rather than that, would that come back to committee for the committee to look at that plan? I don't see any reason why it couldn't be that, and it would be very helpful if it came back, which would then obviously give residents in the village a chance of looking at actually what the scheme is. Llancarvan has residents who would be quite knowledgeable as far as these type of matters are concerned, and I feel it would be helpful and put people's minds at rest that they're going to be spared the problems they've suffered by this increased development. Unfortunately, we have an extremely sort of piecemeal development, and I'm not knocking that, because obviously that's the nature of the growth of a business. But I think if you go back to previous decisions for similar buildings, none of those had conditions involving drainage. And I think it's felt that this is, in a way, almost the straw that's going to break the camel's back. So,
Thank you. Okay. I think we know what you're asking for, Councillor Johnson. Marcus, before we open the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, obviously the report does deal with the issues that Councillor Kemp has raised and that were raised with him by his constituents. One thing I would say is I wouldn't recommend the condition is brought back. Members will be aware of some issues we've had in the past when we've brought larger developments and conditions associated with larger developments back. It's a very technical response to conditions such as that, which in reality, not wishing to be unkind, it is, lay people are not, we're not the best ones. I'm a lay person when it comes to some of these drainage matters, and I'm not the best person to be advised on or comment on them. We rely very much on our own drainage engineers to advise on the acceptability or otherwise. So I would suggest that isn't brought back to committee.
Thank you, Marcus. First hand, Councillor Bird.
Yeah, as I know the site, so hence the need not to attend site visit. Sorry, I wasn't able to anyway. But this is a very substantial agri-business and is a very large employer and probably feeds an awful lot of people. The assumptions that this will cause additional smell, I think, are unfounded because it's a loose housing type system. It's not a slurry-based system, which generally are the culprits of smell. The only time there will be additional smell is on clean out of this property, which probably will happen twice a year. So smell is going to be an irrelevant one in comparison to the rest of the farm. This business is a very well run, very well managed business, and obviously there is conflict between any agri-business and neighbours. I, being a farmer myself, see it, but personally I would just say I support this and would recommend approval.
Are you moving off the recommendations? Moving off the recommendations. Is there a seconder? Okay. Councillor Johnson first.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bird, I think, is far more knowledgeable on this situation than myself. I was just going to clarify two things. Firstly was the Marcus, as the officer, made reference to the size of permitted development. So I just wanted to clarify how much smaller it would have to be for them to do what they like anyway compared to the plans in front of us. And the second was, whilst I understand the argument made that we are not necessarily the experts on this, I would happily support it coming back here if other members of the committee thought that was a useful thing to do. If not, and I'm aware that obviously Councillor Bird has just moved the original set of recommendations, then perhaps there would be some form of discussion taking place or opportunity for the local members and the local community council to meet with officers or those responsible for the plans to ensure that that local members and the local council are content with the plans as they're put forward.
Marcus?
Thank you, Chair. Yes. In terms of the size, it's approximately 6 metres shorter, maybe, in terms of the long length back. The permitted development rights for agricultural buildings are quite interesting. You are allowed to build a certain size, and then you can't build another one within a period of time, but then you can. So it does allow for exponential growth on farm units. So, but this is bigger. That's important to note. It is bigger. That's why it needs planning permission, but not significantly bigger than what would normally be permitted development. In respect of the discharge of the condition, do we question I'm asking Ian now? Do we actually put these on the weekly list? Condition comes in, the local okay. Oh, okay, I'll carry on with this one. What I wouldn't really want to do is it to be called to committee. Sorry. What I would say is, in terms of the size, are we talking, did we not get the size? Right. In terms of it coming back to committee, they aren't automatically consulted, neighbours, but we could ask for the local members to be consulted on or to be notified of the details of drainage being submitted, and obviously they could then pass those details on possibly to the community council in due course. It is a discharge of condition, and it is very much a technical matter for our highways and our drainage engineers to comment on. So, but that would, I don't see any reason why that couldn't happen. That, I believe, is what actually happened with Darren Farm, for example.
Quick follow-up.
Just wanted to see, because we have the local member sat behind, and whether he had any thoughts on that. You know, I don't know if it's appropriate for him to speak now or later on before we make a decision.
I mean, there's not a function for the local member to speak on it, but I'm happy if you're comfortable with what Marcus has said. I'm happy to second that as a way of moving in and having consultation. And I'll turn around now while Councillor Thomas is next on my list to speak. I got a thumbs up, right? Councillor Thomas.
Yeah, being one of the few councillors who's had the benefit of seeing the site this morning, the field that they're proposing to put it in seemed to me like quite a wet field anyway, from the way that it was badly trenched, and looking at some of the stuff that was growing there. I noticed though from the recommendation 7 does go into quite a serious amount of detail about the amount of information on surface water drainage that needs to be submitted prior to building. This is a matter of animal welfare rather than anything else. The structure is similar in appearance but slightly different in dimension to the barn right next to it, and I see no reason to oppose this at all.
Thank you. Councillor Parker.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, as Marcus said, I was actually responsible for asking the Darren Farm to come in at the early stage, mainly because the surface water drainage proposal by the previous applicant, not the ones that we have at the moment, had an idea that it would go through the central Cowbridge, and that's the reason I did it. Having asked for it, we then I was then allowed to go and see Lee Howells, the drainage thing, and I might say it was much better that I went on as the ward member to understand the drainage, because you can actually have a sensible dialogue. So I would support the recommendation and recommend that the local ward member or ward members visit the drainage officer as and when the details are submitted. It won't hold up anything, and it does give you a chance to understand exactly the technical nature, which we couldn't, in fairness, easily understand at this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Parker. You were the seconder of the original motion. Councillor Bird, as the mover, are you happy to accept the wording as stated? I don't think you want to speak anymore. Councillor King, you going to go?
If I may just say that it was my intention to attend this morning. Something came up and I wasn't able to. But my concern over all the objections was about drainage, and quite frankly, I have to trust what people tell me. It appears to be addressed within clause 7 of the conditions. It appears that the subsequent proposal is the most effective thing we can do. So I'm relaxed. I don't think I'd have benefited by seeing a field.
Thank you. If there are no other comments, subject to the slight rewording that we've just discussed in terms of local member notification and conversation, can I have a vote on the officer recommendations as moved? All those in favour? It's unanimous. Thank you very much. Before everyone dives away, because that was the last planning application, I have, over the last few months, been in conversation with planning officers about trying to ensure that we are kept abreast of developments, look at training, look at the outcomes. And one of the things that canvassed a few members within our group, and certainly previously there were site tours of previous developments to look at how the planning process affected the outcome, that members found to be quite useful. So we are looking at possibly doing one of those in the spring, late spring, early summer. And so the planning officers asked me if you have any particular sites you think are good examples, if you could email into Vicky, or indeed bad examples that show where planning maybe hasn't worked. We're going to try and do 4 or 5, and we will look at the plans that came in, then the plans that were then sent to committee, and then also then go out to the site and look at them. And I think it'll be a really positive experience, certainly as a part of continuing training. Councillor Johnson.
that does sound a very good thing for us to do with the development. I'm going to just take this opportunity to move slightly off that topic and just note that there's I believe it's a consultation at the moment regarding permitted development and use class from Welsh Government, and I'm aware that the deadline for that is the 28th of September, which I believe is the day after our next meeting. I was wondering if officers could inform us whether we are intending to make a response to that consultation, and if so, whether that's going through any formal process within this council.
Happy to discuss that briefly. Marcus.
Yes, I suspect we will be responding, and the process has changed recently, that the response is prepared and then agreed through delegated powers through Cabinet and the Cabinet member. So it will, if a response goes, it will be with the agreement of the Cabinet member for planning as it's sent on. We would, by all means, bring it to the committee afterwards to show what the response has said and explain what's happening. If a response goes, because the changes that are proposed actually are not that massive. I know there are some comments around some of the more technical sides of it, but a lot of what they're doing actually is just catching up with what's happened in England, because that's actually been in place for about 3 years, I think, in England, the splitting up of some of the use classes and that sort of thing. So most of that we wouldn't comment on. We think in most instances it's probably okay because it's working quite well in England to defend, and it's one of the key things is A3 restaurants, pubs, and those uses, and making a slight definition between those uses, which I think all members would accept is probably a good thing, because it can cause some confusion, obviously, that a takeaway is in the same class as a pub, is in the same class as a restaurant. So that's probably where the biggest focus will be. But we will, by all means, bring it back under general planning matters to the next committee, any comments that are made.
With that, I'll close the meeting. Thank you very much for your attendance. I'll see you at the end of the month.